Hello and welcome back to my channel. As we close out another year, how would you sum up your 2024? Was it filled with excitement and milestones, or did it feel more like a quiet, steady journey? I think when we were younger, we all had big dreams, believing that one day something grand would happen to give our lives real meaning. But as we get older, we start to embrace the ordinary, realizing that we might not become the heroes we once imagined ourselves to be. So today I want to share with you a book that captures this exact feeling. It's called The Tartar, written by Italian author Dino Buzzati. Well, The Tartar follows the life of Giovanni Drogo, a young officer assigned to a remote fort overlooking an empty desert. It is called the Tartar because of some legends about the Tartars to the north. So at first, Drogo is desperate to escape and return to his normal life in the city. He plans to stay only a few months, but as time passes, he becomes almost ensnared by the strange pull of the place and is unable to leave. As the years goes by, Drogo grows increasingly disillusioned with the monotony of life at the fort. Yet, deep down, he still has a presentiment, or perhaps more accurately, a wishful thinking that someday something momentous will happen. The enemies will come and he'll finally have the chance to serve his country. And this moment of glory will give meaning to his life, to all those years spent waiting. But days turns into months and eventually years slip by unnoticed. So does the enemy ever come? I won't spoil that. You'll find out at the end of the book. But in the end, I think that's no longer the point, because what matters is that Drogo spends the rest of his life at the fort, waiting for a chance to prove his worth. And for me, whether he ever gets that chance or not, those years of waiting are still part of his life, aren't they? So that's basically the plot of the novel. But I wouldn't say it's a plot-driven story, because nothing particularly big or dramatic really happens. And I think that's exactly the point, because the novel isn't so much about the events themselves as it is about their symbolic meaning. It's about the quiet and almost invisible forces that shape our lives. According to Buzzati himself, The Tartar was inspired by his own experience as a newspaper journalist. The idea of the novel came out of the monotonous night shift I was working at Corriere della Sera in those days. It often occurred to me that routine would never end, and so would eat up my whole life quite pointlessly. It's a common enough feeling, I think, for most people, especially when you find yourself slotted into the timetabled existence of a big town. Transposing that experience into a fantastical military world was an almost instinctive decision. Well, I guess most of us can relate to these repetitive, mechanical rhythms of daily life. The feeling of being caught in a never-ending routine where time slips away unnoticed and we begin to question whether any of it is leading to something meaningful. When Drogo arrives at the fort, he seems to have already foreseen the kind of life that awaits him. The fort is isolated and is told that there hasn't been a war in years and it's unlikely one will come anytime soon. The older officers even suggest he leave while he still has the chance. And Drogo does want to leave, and in fact, he asks to depart almost immediately. He even has the opportunity to do so after 4 months, when a doctor grants him a certificate allowing his departure. But then, very strangely, he changes his mind and decides to stay. The memory of his native city passed through Drogo's mind. A vague image of noisy streets in the rain, of plaster statues, of damp barracks, tuneless bells, tired and misshapen faces, endless afternoons, dirty, dusty ceilings. But here, the deep mountain night was approaching, with clouds flying up over the fort, harbingers of wonders to come. And from the north, invisible there behind the ramparts, Drogo felt the onset of his own destiny. Well, there seems to be some strange force that keeps him there, a kind of spell maybe, and it's not just him. Many others at the fort seem to have the same experience. They come intending to stay for a short while, but end up spending their entire careers there. But What exactly is this force that binds them? What is it that turns time into a trap? Well, this feels very Kafkaesque, although Buzzati claimed he had never read Kafka before writing the Tartar Steppe. I feel that Drogo's slow descent into the endless cycle of waiting, meaningless tasks, and nonsensical bureaucracy bears a striking resemblance to Kafka's style, and some suggest that the novel is a subtle critique of fascism, where individuals are absorbed into a greater system without understanding its purpose or questioning its morality. But I think there's also a psychological aspect to Drogo's descent into routine, because when he first arrives at the fort, he is eager to leave, but as the days and months drag on, the repetitive nature of life there dulls his sense of time. What once felt unbearable gradually becomes a way of life. And it's easy to see how this happens. It's like when we are dissatisfied with our current situation, but reluctant to leave our comfort zone, we often convince ourselves that change can wait, that there will always be time tomorrow. We avoid making difficult decisions, thinking that the future will offer some more opportunities, perhaps. And Drogo feels the same way, and he believes he's still young and has time to leave, that he can always make a choice later. But what he doesn't realize is that each day at the fort chips away at his time, and before long, the years will pass in a blur. And I want to read a passage from the novel that really resonate with me. Drogo remained alone and felt almost happy. He relished with pride his determination to remain. The bitter pleasure of leaving the little assured happiness for something which a long time hence might perhaps prove to be good and great. And underneath, there was the consoling thought that there was always time still to leave. A presentiment, or was it only a hope, of great and noble events had made him stay up here, but perhaps he had merely postponed things. At bottom, nothing was settled. He had so much time before him. All the good things of life seemed to await him. What need was there to exert oneself? Even women, these strange and lovable creatures, he looked forward to as a certain happiness formally promised him by the normal course of life. How much time there was before him! A single year seemed immensely long, and the good years had barely begun. They seemed to form a long, long series of which it was impossible to see the end, a treasure still intact and so great that one might tire of it. There was no one to say to him, "Watch out, Giovanni Drogo." Life seemed to him to be inexhaustible. The illusion was obstinate, although youth had already begun to fade. But Drogo had no knowledge of time. Even if he had had before him hundreds and hundreds of years of youth, that too would have seemed no great thing to him. And instead, he had at his disposal only an ordinary simple life, a short human youth, a miserly gift which could be counted on the fingers of two hands and which could slip away before he had even got to know it. What a long time there was before him, he thought. And yet, so he had heard tell, men exist who at a certain point, strange to say, begin to wait for their death. Death which everyone knows about, but which is quite absurd and cannot possibly concern him. Drogo smiled to think of it, and as he did so, urged on by the cold, he began to walk up and down. Well, I think just like Drogo, we often find ourselves preparing for tomorrow. We look ahead and put off the present for some imagined future. We convince ourselves that once we overcome the next hurdle, be it school, a job, or some other milestone, we'll finally be able to live the life we want. But in doing so, we forget to live fully in the present. Drogo's experience feels like an allegory for this very phenomenon. Life in the city, while comfortable, seems too ordinary for him. It is at the fort, with his monotonous, empty days, that he finds something that the city cannot offer, and that is hope. Even if it is faint and distant, hope is still something that keeps him going. The belief that tomorrow will bring something different, that something will happen to make all the waiting worthwhile, is what sustains him. And he's living for the future, for an event that might justify his sacrifices and struggles. It is much like how we often get caught up in an imagined future, and I think the longer Drogo waits, the more he resists returning to the city, to that ordinary life with its predictable routines and seemingly mediocre destinies. His life becomes defined not by what he has, but by what he's waiting for. But there's a sentence in the novel that struck me deeply. So a page is slowly turned, falls over to join the others. The ones already finished. It is still only a thin layer. Those still to be read are inexhaustible in comparison, but it is always another page finished, a portion of your life. Well, now that we realize the cruelty of time, how can we live a more meaningful life with the limited time we have? And is there even a way to measure the meaning of life? In the Tartar Steppe, Drogo, as a soldier, believes his life can only gain meaning through war. Even when he witnesses his colleague Agostino die during a scouting mission, not in a battle, he considers Agostino luckier than himself because at least he died for his country. But does Agostino, before his death, really think that way? And as Drogo grows older and realizes he spent his life in the monotony of the fort, never having the chance to die in a battle, he begins to envy his friends in the city. They've built families, pursued careers, and now enjoy their retirement. But do they all feel that they've led meaningful lives? Do they too have unfinished dreams? And looking back, do they ever regret not choosing a different path? Well, I think the novel carries a strong existentialist undertone. It reminds me of Albert Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus, in which there is a passage that discusses the rise of absurdity. It feels quite similar to Buzzati's description of his work as a journalist, and also to Drogo's monotonous military life at the fort. Rising, tram, 4 hours in the office or factory, meal, tram, 4 hours of work, meal, sleep, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, according to the same rhythm. This path is easily followed most of the time. But one day, the why arises, and everything begins in the weariness tinged with amazement. Begins, this is important. Weariness comes at the end of the acts of a mechanical life, but at the same time, it inaugurates the impulse of consciousness. It awakens consciousness and provokes what follows. What follows is the gradual return to the chain, or it is the definitive awakening. At the end of the awakening comes, in time, the consequence, suicide or recovery. Well, this awakening to the absurd, where we realize that life's routines do not lead to any ultimate purpose, is at the heart of Camus' philosophy. The absurd arises from the clash between our deep desire for meaning and the universe's indifference to that desire. So once we become aware of this, we are forced to confront the question, how do we live in a world without inherent meaning? Well, for many, a life without meaning is not worth living. But Camus argues that we can embrace this meaninglessness and continue to live regardless. And he calls this stance revolt. The person who fully understands life's absurdity and continues to live with defiance and even joy is what Camus calls an absurd hero. According to Camus, Sisyphus is an absurd hero. He is condemned by the gods to push a boulder up a hill only for it to roll back down each time. He accepts his fate without hope for a final transcendent purpose. And in fact, it is precisely in his endless struggle and his defiance of the futility of his task that Sisyphus embodies Camus' idea of revolt. He represents the human capacity to find meaning in the struggle itself, rather than in the outcome. Now, is Drogo an absurd hero? I'm not sure, because Drogo begins with a purpose. He believes that war is the ultimate meaning of his life. But as he spends years in the fort without fighting any battle, he begins to realize that his existence is just a mechanical routine. The question of why arises. Why is he stuck in this monotonous life, waiting for a war that never comes. He starts to question the meaning of his actions in the face of life's inherent meaninglessness. And while Drogo doesn't exactly revolt the way Camus describes, there is still an awakening, a realization that he has spent his life chasing an illusion of purpose. It is an awakening to the absurdity of his situation, and unlike Sisyphus, who embraces his endless struggle with a sense of freedom and defiance of the gods, Drogo's rebellion feels more like resignation than defiance. I'm not sure if Drogo ever comes to understand that the meaning of life lies not in achieving an ultimate goal, but in the act of striving and living itself. And did he, in some way, find satisfaction in the repetitive life of the fort, much like Sisyphus finds fulfillment in the endless task of pushing the boulder up the mountain? And there is a passage from the myth of Sisyphus that I really like, and if I were to cross paths with a younger Drogo at Fort Bastiani, still so determined to search for the meaning of life, I would want to read this to him. I leave Sisyphus at the foot of the mountain. One always finds one's burden again, but Sisyphus teaches the higher fidelity that negates the gods and raises rocks. He too concludes that all is well. The universe henceforth without a master seems to him neither sterile nor futile. Each atom of that stone, each mineral flake of that night-filled mountain, in itself forms a world. The struggle of self towards the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Well, that's all I have for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and wishing you all a happy and fulfilling new year, finding joy and purpose not in distant goals, but in the acts of living itself. See you next time.